more effective, more equitable, more efficient to separate the government financing of schooling from the government running of schools. And that's Milton Friedman. And I want to show you a short video of how far we've come in 27 years.
The way to bring learning back into the classroom, the way to make sure that schools are responsive to the needs of the children they have in their classroom, is to give parents more power, more control over their own children's schooling.
But the voucher idea is growing in some states. Florida, where we saw Governor Jeb Bush earlier tonight, started one just last week.
The voters want a diversity of options. They don't just want either public or private, they want a whole plethora of options.
All children are precious and all children are different. And what is right for one child won't be for another. Let's trust the parents to figure out which is which.
West Virginia legislature passed a bill creating an education savings account program.
State leaders are calling it the most expansive education savings program in the nation.
Freedom protects diversity. We have all of these different expressions of people's individuality that produces the great achievements of civilization and that provides the great hope and protection of our freedom.
That's how far we've come, and we have a long way to go. You know, when we started in 1996, there were a handful of states with charter schools and only 2 states with private school choice and 2 cities, serving less than 6,000 kids. Today, I want to unveil a map that you'll see. This is the number of children, and it's likely to be over 1 million by the end of this year that are being served in private school choice. There are 9 states that have education savings accounts, 27 voucher programs, 26 tax credit scholarship programs, 9 individual tax credit programs, 3 refundable tax credit programs. Take a look at Florida, the first state, Jeb Bush, 1999. That's how many kids are taking choice now, and it's going to be likely 300,000 by the end of the year. Take a look at the next state, my great state of Indiana, that has a number of programs, has 4 programs operating, over 58,000 students, soon to be 80,000 students with private school choice. West Virginia in 2021, 2016 when we rebranded, we picked 10 states for universal choice. Florida, West Virginia, Indiana, Louisiana, Arkansas, Arizona, and almost Iowa. Almost all of them have universal choice now. West Virginia passed the first universal ESA program, and then on to the last one, Arizona, which actually has started the floodgate. That started in 1997 in Arizona. They actually have 5 programs serving well over 60,000 kids. It's going to be, this year, it's going to go up to 100,000. So this is growth. And I'm excited and honored to be joined here with 2 amazing men to talk about this, right? So to my immediate right is Dr. Steve Perry. Steve is an educator, best-selling author, and founder and head of schools at Capital Preparatory Schools. In my personal opinion, Steve's voice and his talent is revolutionizing not only education in America, but education advocacy in America. To my further right is Sharif El-Mekki. Sharif is the founder and CEO of the Center for Black Educator Development. And the goal of this center is to recruit, train, hire, and retain teachers that reflect the cultural and social background of the children they serve. He also is a charter school leader in the city of Philadelphia and been a long-term advocate for parental choice. So welcome to the two of you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
So I have two simple questions, right? So Milton Friedman said, I sense we are on the verge of a breakthrough in one state or another that will sweep like wildfire throughout the rest of the country. I would argue that we've actually had a pretty good run of school choice in the last few years. I want you to tell me, why do you think this is happening now, and what's the reasons behind it?
Yeah, I would say, one, around dissatisfaction, right? When I think about what people are looking for their children and for their grandchildren. I ran a charter school for 11 years in the community that I grew up in. And this is a school that everyone recognized was struggling. A little embarrassed to say, I actually went there for summer school my 11th grade year when I was jerking around in a chemistry class. And I knew then, and that summer, so it wasn't just the fact that I had to go to summer school, which I thought was way beneath me. But the first thing in my head when I talked to the teacher was just like, that's crazy. I don't belong there. Like, that's chaos. Even as a high school student, a 15-year-old, I knew that middle school, they place you in certain places, that there was absolute chaos and learning wasn't going to happen. And it was one thing with me stopping my own learning as an 11th grader. It's another thing to have systems of chaos stopping me. I did go, but to later on, decades later, this school still needing intervention and families saying like, hey, you can't continue to do this. And also think about my grandparents. So 2 sets of grandparents, 8 children in between them, all of them found a way to opt out of the zip-coded assigned school that they were being sent to, and they found other options. Most of them, Catholic school. Right, and so just this idea of like needing more for children and for grandchildren, for the progeny, is absolutely a critical piece that I think informs parents' decisions about where do I want my child to be, where will they be safe intellectually, culturally, emotionally, and spiritually.
That's great. Steve.
The first public school in the United States of America was opened in 1635 in Boston, Massachusetts. The notion was that it's a public good to provide access to a quality education. For approximately 350 years, the exact same system stood in place, despite Brown, despite all the other innovations. In fact, you can go to some of the oldest schools in America and they're run exactly the same way. What's happened in the past 23 years is that there's been a fundamental shift in the way we see and absorb education as the public. Now, there are parallel tracks that are leading to the same end. On the one hand, you have African Americans, Latin people, and poor people who see their traditional neighborhood schools as, quite frankly, insufficient. Insufficient in the fact that it doesn't provide them with the basic expectation. Getting an A in an F school is an F. Graduating from a school where you don't know how to read is not graduation. Parallel, we're seeing individuals who are white and not poor, but not wealthy, who believed in the notion that the public good is better when you have access to a quality, free education. And they have been exposed to the shortcomings of school, not because their kids can't read because they can, but because they see themselves participating in an international competition for the economic well-being of our nation. And then there's another group that goes in and out of cultures and classes that sees that there's a religious or other spiritual purpose for education. And so these tracks are running parallel, but they're ending up in the same place, which is there is no reason why we should expect to run schools or any institution as we did in 1635. Nobody wants to go to a doctor who's using only the technology from 1635. anybody interested in leeches. Nobody should be engaging in the technology of 1635. 1635. My people, not the best time for us either. So you don't want to go back there. I don't want to go back there. We recognize that the traditional process of sending children to the closest building in the community that they call a school is insufficient for all of us. The only reason why we persist in this place is because too much money has been put into this failed system. And so those who are in positions of power capitulate, trying to convince themselves and the rest of us that good enough is good enough. And the final part is this: the reason why we're here having this conversation, why we may have many diametrically opposed ideas, but we are in violent agreement on school choice, is because I don't care what you want to teach your children. You teach your children what you believe because they're your children. That's your right. My right too.
So we've had this progress, and I appreciate how we're getting there. We've had a lot of this progress, but you know what? We still have barriers in our way. I really want to know what's still standing in our way and why is that, and what needs to be done about it.
You know, I'll pick up right where Dr. Perry left off. I think it's, you know, when Derek Bell, and you may not know his name, but you know some of his work with CRT. Derek Bell also speaks about that I hear far less in the conversation is around interest convergence. And where does that fit in? And Dr. Perry perfectly described that. And like, what does interest convergence mean? And when it's frayed and when it's not there. I'm gonna tell you, when I first was introduced to parental choice was in elementary school, going to a Pan-African school. And I've been in certain circles that's talking about school choice, but they're saying, oh, but not that. Where that was my introduction to my parents, deciding like, here's a space that we want our child to be raised in, where their positive racial identity would be developed, where they wouldn't experience racial biases and racism. Racial bias is a cute way of saying racism if you weren't aware of that, right? Like, they chose a school that was the best fit for us and as children. And they exercise this all the time. At some points, we went to Islamic school. Sometimes my siblings were homeschooled. So they were exercising this in the most, I believe, the most pristine way. Many of their choices would not fit under the umbrella of many folks who are saying like, oh, I'm about choice. Sometimes they're saying, I'm about the choice that I would make, and I want that made for everybody. And I would say we have to like really expand the thinking about what that means and really center what are parents saying. And not just dominant culture parents, not just white parents. There are a whole lot of other families who believe in it, but they don't see themselves in some of the rhetoric and some of the conversations that are being had about pro-choice. So that means that interest convergence starts to dissipate because they're like, wait a minute, you're not really for what I believe about choice for my child, the socioeconomic and political conditions that they may be in themselves. So I would say one thing is making sure that we're involving the voices of all families and making sure that we're hearing this is what other people are saying.
So what stands in the way is if choice has got to be choice for all, not just choice for some. And choice means that people can make an actual choice even if we disagree with that choice. And that's part of the question. So Steve.
I would agree.
That's the best kind of choice.
Yeah.
I'll say it this way. What stands in the way is the teachers union. Like, we don't have to dress this pig up and call the prom queen. The lipstick doesn't change that it's got an oink. Like, this is what it is. We're here in this conversation because the teachers union makes money off of teachers who are forced to pay dues to their institution. Let's do some simple math, right? It's in the head, so just bear with me for a second. If you were in California, let's say that the average teacher pays approximately $1,500 per year towards their union. And you were to have 1 million children who were to be in a choice school that's non-union. So for every 20 students, you would have one teacher or 75,000 teachers. 50,000 teachers. That will be a net loss to the California Teachers Association of $75 million in annual receipts. They don't give a damn about your kids or my kids. They want to make sure that they maintain that level of power. This has nothing to do with data. 15% of the United States schools are magnet or charter, yet 65% of all of the U.S. News and World Report top performing high schools are magnet or charter. 15% represents 65% of the top performing schools in the country. No one needs to wonder how. We know how. Yet and still, we allow ourselves to get caught up in this jousting with the teachers union. And this is where people like us, who sometimes find ourselves on the complete opposite side of the spectrum, have to lay down our weapons for this particular cause. And I say it this way. When we get caught up in the culture wars, what happens is we allow the teachers union to drive a Mack truck into the conversation around school choice. We take our eye off the daggone ball and we start swinging at each other. Whether you can teach African American AP in Florida or not. Whether you can teach CRT or not. Whether you think the world is flat or not. Whether you teach evolution or not. Whatever the thing that you feel like you teach. But if we stay 10 toes down on the notion that every single parent or grandparent or individual responsible for raising their children should be allowed to choose the school that is best for them. I'm a voucher person, by the way, full-fledged voucher. Then we can decide what works for us. Our problem is the teachers union doesn't move from their position. They're against all forms of non-union choice, period. But what happens to us along the way, on our way to the state capitol, on our way to the Board of Education? We get into these pissing matches about what's being taught inside the classrooms. Instead of saying, we don't have to have an argument about whether or not you want to fry fish and I want to bake fish. You go to where they're frying fish, I go to where they're baking fish, and we agree that we get to choose where we eat. I'll say this final point. I'm a voucher person because I know that this is a country that actually believes in vouchers. Medicaid, Medicare, the GI Bill, Section 8, right? Student financial aid. This allows every single individual the opportunity to choose the best academic circumstances for them. We have to be disciplined and stay focused on the idea of choice above all.
Do that. So Corey mentioned Milton Friedman's quote. The actual quote that Milton used, said was, only a crisis, actual or perceived, produces real change. The change that occurs depends on the quality of the ideas lying around at the time. That, I believe, he said, is our main function, to develop ideas so that the politically impossible becomes the politically inevitable. So what, in your mind, stands in the way? What do we need to do still? Okay, so we've talked about the barriers, we've talked about why we're here, but what still needs to be done to truly make the idea of choice for all politically inevitable?
I think there's so many things. One, learning from lessons. Look, I'm from Philadelphia, and many of you probably saw what happened recently with the governor. I think trying to understand why. We talked backstage it was this enormous reaction, but fewer people understand okay, what are the political issues on the ground that made the governor have to make a different choice. And I think sometimes the reaction impedes the understanding. Mm-hmm. And I think the reaction first, so let's start with understanding first, okay, what's happened? Why did it happen? And then what needs to go forward with in that case?
Mm-hmm. I say we have to run full slates of school choice people. We have to make sure that the people who are currently elected are either inspired or afraid to go against us. Just this past legislative session in Connecticut, we had a school approved. Now, Connecticut has a draconian process, but I'll be brief. We got the highest score in the state for our application. We had what they referred to as historic levels of support. At one meeting, we had 423 people come out to support our school. On a night where we had 2 home football games at the 2 high schools in town, we had over 110 people come out to support. We were unanimously approved by the State Department of Education. And at 11:48 p.m., 2 senators pulled $4.5 million out of the budget. I know it was at 11:48 because I received a text that said they pulled your school out of the budget. And at 12 o'clock, they voted on the budget. That happens because we can win the ground game, but we're not in, as we say from Hamilton, the musical, we're not in the room where it happens. And we need to make sure that when they close that door, they hear your voice. They know the door is going to open. We're not some narcos democracy. We're not some kleptocracy. That's not who we are. You don't get to go against the will of the people. Every single poll for Democrats and Republicans about school choice is positive to school choice. Yet we keep talking about this thing like it's something we're not really sure about. The data in terms of performance is clearly there. The community support is clearly there. Black, white, Asian, poor, rich, middle class, all support. If you ask anyone, anywhere, who do you think should determine where your child goes to school? Everyone says the parent. Where the breakdown in our system is that we,